Hey loves, Haley Steinfeld here. Let's be real. When I'm on the red carpet, everyone wants to know whose dress I'm wearing. But here's the thing. We're so focused on those details, we're missing something that's actually way more important. Breast health. It's wild. Breasts get so much attention, but they're still so ignored when it matters most. Don't know what I'm talking about? Tune in on February 9th and visit yourattentionplease.com. That's yourattentionplease.com. See you then.
Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about some of the tense exchanges between city staffers and our new city council, the federal investigation of possible anti-Semitism at Portland State University, and the proposal lawmakers are eyeing to fund needed wildfire resources. Plus, we talk about how one local utility company is trying to get out of paying millions of dollars in damages. Joining me on this week's Friday News Roundup are Willamette Week City Hall reporter Sophie Peel and our very own executive producer John Notarianni. It's Friday, February 7th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Welcome everyone to the Friday News Roundup. Sophie, John, thank you for hanging out with me this morning.
Hey, Claudia.
Hi.
For those of you new to the show, today is the day we break down some of the biggest local stories of the week with some of the best and brightest journalists in town. But before we jump into the news, I usually ask an opening question so our listeners can get to know our guests a little better. And today's opening question is actually related to yesterday's episode. If you didn't catch it, we spoke to OPB's Lillian Karabayak about her travels all over Oregon using just public transportation. And she took something like 38 buses and 3 trains. It took her over 14 days. She went from the coast all the way to the most eastern parts of Oregon. It's a pretty cool radio series called Stop Requested. But you can also just check out the conversation we had about it yesterday. But it made me wonder what the most memorable public transportation story that either of you might have in Oregon.
I don't know if this is like the most amazing time I've ever had, but this was like a relatively recent one, so it sticks in my brain. Probably like sometime last year, I live up in St. John's and I was going downtown to go to a concert. So I decided to take a bus down Lombard and then transfer and get downtown and go see some live music. And I got on the bus and we made it about 3/4 of a mile and the bus broke down. Has this ever happened to you?
No, but I've heard about it. I heard it does happen.
I mean, the driver was great about it. And it was such an interesting, like, social experiment because it was all these people on this bus and they were trying to figure out if they could get it going again. And nobody wanted to give up on their bus ride. Yeah. But, like, everybody was also in this sort of suspended state of, well, what do we do? How do we go? So, the driver eventually figured out that the bus, in fact, was not going to start moving again, and they called another bus to come pick us up. And at that point, I unfortunately gave up on the Portland public transit system and called an Uber.
Was that the last time you used Portland public transportation?
I think it was the last time I rode a Portland bus.
Oh, that's unfortunate. What about you, Sophie?
I've just had very, very pleasant experiences on TriMet. Like, I don't talk to people. People don't talk to me. I remember when I was actually interning at Willamette Week and I was living out on 82nd and I would TriMet into Willamette Week and then I would like hop on a couple different buses to get to Southwest Portland to waitress after I was like interning. And then I would obviously like go back home. And it was so much time just spent on a bus. But I think the most pleasant part is there's just like this buzz. There's this gentle like ambient noise on TriMet that I just like, it would put me to sleep every single time. Like some of my calmest moments were just like sitting on TriMet, like I'm going home.
Okay. This is actually a true story and it's going to sound like I made it up, but it's true. I don't know, like maybe 10 years ago, my partner and I went out for New Year's Eve and you know, every New Year's Eve, PBOT basically has free fare. And so you can take Maxes, you can take buses, and they're absolutely free, which is amazing because they just don't want you driving. So we took a bus to a Max. And as we were on the Max, I'm not going to say we weren't drunk, but I don't think we were that drunk. You know what I mean? But my girlfriend, she always purchases pants, and this is just a woman's problem, where your stuff just falls out of your pockets all the time. And so I'm constantly looking whenever she gets up to make sure she didn't drop her phone, her wallet, her keys. So we got out at our stop, and I did it, and I saw her wallet, and I picked it up. And for some reason, more than one person saw that, and I literally got a standing ovation. Because everyone was so drunk. They were just like, oh, that could have been so bad. You did. Like, you know what I mean? Like, hero. And I was like, really? Me? And we talk about that sometimes, and it feels silly because, when people are like, and then everyone clapped, and you're like, okay, that happened. Yeah. And I'm like, that actually happened.
And then they broke out into song.
I know, but it actually fucking happened, and I think it's because everybody was drunk. So I have that fond memory.
Look at you, Claudia the hero.
When really I'm just like, I've just dated this woman for so long. I'm like, I just know what's going to happen.
I do love the Max ride after a Blazers game coming from the Moda Center. Like, that is a good train ride.
Yeah, it's just that energy, totally.
If we win.
Well, thank you both for your answers on to the news of the week. Sophie, what are you looking at? What's going on? Because I know it's not one particular headline.
Yeah, it's sort of a trend that I've been following a little bit since the new city council took seat. And obviously, we're an entirely new form of government. But so now we have a administrative branch of the government and then a legislative branch of the government. And it's been really interesting to see those two branches sort of interact and try to figure out their places relative to one another. And there have been some tensions early on. And I think this is going to be something that we keep seeing, maybe in some meatier ways in the coming weeks, especially with the budget. But early on, there have been some tensions between the two branches, sort of about like, what is an administrative decision versus a legislative decision? Because it's not always clear. Like, there is some real gray area there. And also kind of who gets to speak for the city is sort of an interesting and more like nebulous question, but there is that tension in talking to people in City Hall. So a couple examples of where they've kind of rubbed up against each other. One is when the city council was mad that they didn't get as many staff as they wanted to. And so they said, okay, we're going to increase our staffing. It's going to cost $4.6 million. The administrative side, the finance people at the city came back and said, okay, if you want $4.6 million, this is where it's going to come from. Mm-hmm. It's going to come from trash pickup, camp sweeps, and the city administrator's office. And the city council is like, why do you guys get to say where this money is coming from? Like, you're acting as if that's the only place it could come from. We want it to come from a different place. And they did eventually end up taking it from the city's contingency funds rather than, kind of this hodgepodge of things that the finance people said you have to take it from. So that was sort of an early example. It was also really unclear for both city councilors and city staff in sort of this first month of what level of communication individual city councilors could have with individual city staff. And so some city staff were a little bit more like, whatever, it's my job to inform people, whether that's a city councilor or whoever is. So they would talk liberally to city councilors. Other staff were like, I can't speak to you. Even if a city councilor would go to them asking for some pretty basic information about their service area, they'd be like, nope, I don't understand. Do I have to go through my deputy city administrator? Do I have to go through my boss? It was just like the flow of information. It was really unclear exactly who could talk to who. And some city staff were like really concerned about crossing a line, so they just wouldn't talk to the councilors, which obviously is a problem because we need our city councilors to understand how the city works if they're going to make decisions for us. Last little example I'll throw out there is the whole Zenith debacle. Obviously, the city, the administrative side, granted the land use compatibility statement this week. And a couple of the councilors, well, I think more than a couple of the councilors were very upset by that. Their argument was basically like, you're saying this is an administrative decision. This isn't necessarily an administrative decision. Like, we think this could be a legislative decision. So I think this tension is going to keep happening. It's just a very interesting dynamic.
Do you foresee more of these kinds of points of tension?
Absolutely. Yes. I think it's a fair question for both branches. And it's not necessarily like a power struggle. I'm not seeing it in terms of like, the new city council just thinks they should make decisions about everything. And the city administrator is so deeply bureaucratic that they're like, no, we get to make all the decisions. I feel like it's a very fair question on a lot of these issues of like who gets to make this decision. It's interesting. This issue has kind of united the city council, despite their own divisions. And I wouldn't say there are deep, deep divisions. I mean, they are in different places on certain policy areas, but like they are not a fractured group by any means from what I can tell, which is great. That's lovely for now. But they have really united around like, we want to protect the power of the council. Like we were elected for a reason. Portlanders changed the form of government for a reason. They want a legislative body to make decisions for the city. And so I think they feel a lot of like pride in that and like, no, this is what we're here to do. Why is this unelected whole structure over here getting to make decisions? And so, yes, I do think this will be an ongoing issue.
Yeah, it feels like in some ways this is an issue that has sort of come out of this reorganization of the city via the charter process, right? Because I imagine before we had these city departments that were all under individual commissioners, so the lines of communication were a lot clearer, right? But now we've gotten into this position where the council's over here and all of these sort of administrators and city departments are over there. There just isn't a system in place yet. Is that fair?
Yeah, we are still like fumbling through the dark. And I don't even think it's a bad thing. Like, of course, there are going to be growing pains. I mean, this is uncharted territory for Portland. And so we don't really know how this stuff works. And we need to figure it out. And like, it's a good exercise that we are figuring this out.
Do you see this as something that escalates, though? Like, are we going to get to a point where it feels like these two functions of city government are like actually gumming up the works by infighting? Or is it more of a like, wait, where'd the coffee maker go? Where's the printer?
I don't think it will ever be truly sorted out because I think it's a fair question that like all governments should grapple with. I don't think there's ever going to be like a set of rules that truly dictates who gets to make which decisions. And I think that's okay. I think once we have to deal with meatier issues like the real budget problems, and I think those tensions are going to continue to happen.
I feel like we have like a man inside because, you know, you're a City Hall reporter and you see all of the micro expressions that we don't see. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sophie sees the lasagna.
Oh my gosh.
No, she sees how many layers there are in the lasagna. We only know there's lasagna, John.
I cannot tell you. I don't think I've ever heard so much feedback on a story as I did about my one line about lasagna. Like, it was incredible. I was like, I've been doing something wrong this entire time if that's the line that gets people riled up.
Portland loves food. Well, let's take a quick break here, and when we come back, more headlines of the week. All right, so my story this week is based off reporting from Willamette Week, OPB, and KGW8. It's a story that was originally broken by Jewish Insider, and I looked into our federal government opening an investigation on Portland State University for alleged widespread anti-Semitic harassment. And just at the top, I need you to know that PSU isn't the only university the feds have decided to investigate. There are 4 others, and this is all happening because Donald Trump issued an executive order aiming to establish like additional measures to combat anti-Semitism. And this order specifically calls out anti-Semitism on college campuses, and it was honing in specifically on the nationwide college protests that occurred last year demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. So other universities the feds are using their resources to investigate are Columbia, Berkeley, Northwestern, and the University of Minnesota. Twin Cities. Now, these protests that supposedly triggered these investigations, as most of us know, took place in more than these 5 universities. So the immediate question is like, why is Donald Trump so interested in these 5 universities? And just a spoiler alert, we don't know because it's Donald Trump and nothing makes sense. But here are the serious allegations within the executive order. Jewish students have faced an unrelenting barrage of discrimination, denial of access to campus common areas and facilities, including libraries and classrooms, and intimidation, harassment, and physical threats and assault. PSU spokeswoman Katie Swordfisk told Willamette Week that the university takes anti-Semitism concerns very seriously. It also gave Willamette Week this quote: It is the university's understanding that the February 3rd notice from the U.S. Department of Education initiates a directed investigation, which means it is not based on a specific complaint from an individual, but instead is just prompted by the new administration. The notice of investigation is not in itself evidence of any violation. PSU will cooperate fully with the U.S. Department of Education, and should the feds find violations, the school could lose federal funding, which PSU does receive, though it doesn't make up a significant portion of their budget. Who would immediately feel the sting are students who rely on financial aid. Now, before I go on with a few more details from this case, what are you guys thinking?
I mean, I think that these universities were targeted because these were the ones that were on TV. I mean, I think it's as simple as that.
They were on Fox.
Yeah. These were just the ones that he saw on Fox News and were like, Berkeley, Columbia University, Portland State, you know? I could be proven wrong, but I don't think that there's any sort of systemic evidence of any kind that something is going on at these universities that's different than just the protest movement that happened across the country.
Yeah. As a just background for what John is talking about, PSU ceasefire protests this last spring turned into a multi-day occupation of a campus library. So it was very widely televised. And it caused approximately $1.23 million in damage before police forcefully removed the occupation. And on top of calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, PSU campus protesters demanded the university sever ties with Boeing because they helped build Israel's missile defense system and ship them bombs, and also to stop selling Israeli-made merchandise on campus. And before I hand it back over to you guys, I just want to clarify, the demand was for PSU to stop selling Israeli-made merchandise on campus, not Jewish-made merchandise, which appears to be a factual point that seems to get lost in these discussions because Jewish people and the Israeli state are not one and the same.
Right.
And it was also reported widely that there were many, many, many Jewish students at these ceasefire protests across campuses worldwide. So what do you guys think?
I just think this goes more to John's point, but I just think it is such a bummer that Trump is in a position, he's such an unserious person, but because of his position, everything he says at any given whim, it trickles down and we have to take it seriously. PSU has to take this seriously. And so they are, but it's just a travesty. I don't even know. It just sucks.
Yeah. I see this in the lineage of what happened in 2020 when we ended up with federal agents, in Portland during the protests that happened here that President Trump sent in at that point and caused all sorts of trouble. I mean, obviously, if there is actual systemic anti-Semitism, that is horrible. And we shouldn't allow that to happen at our universities. But as the spokesperson said, this is something that came from the administration. It's not based on an actual complaint from anybody, but it still just mucks things up.
These ceasefire protests feel so long ago now that I had to be reminded how harshly the PSU administration came down on staff who took part in the demonstrations. They got fired. PSU sent a very clear message nearly 6 months ago that they did not want any of this political heat. So I'm sure that they're just why? We fired everyone because we didn't want this to happen. They're not dumb. They knew, you know what I mean? They're just look, this is going to look bad no matter what. We got to stop this. And I know someone who works at the county clinic that mentioned a new patient had come in trying to figure out how to transfer their medical history from Kaiser over to Medicaid because they had recently been let go by PSU for taking part of these Gaza protests. So there are real life consequences that PSU handed down to staff members who'd been there for years. So I just find it ironic that this, administration comes and they're just you guys are anti-Semitic. It's just dang. I mean, people got fired.
I don't want to be too doom and gloom, but the sort of extrapolation here that I find really scary is just the potential to withhold federal funding for whatever whim the administration has, and we did also see this week the Attorney General saying that we're going to pause federal funding for sanctuary cities. Portland is a sanctuary city. Portland has, $340 million in federal contracts. And Mayor Wilson has said no, dude, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. But once we get into a position where federal funding can be withheld for just willy-nilly because of something that one person doesn't that's scary.
I don't know if you guys saw, but the Federal Department of Education also released a statement And I found it troubling, and this is why. This is what the statement was. Today, the department is putting universities, colleges, and K-12 schools on notice. This administration will not tolerate continued institutional indifference to the well-being of Jewish students on American campuses, nor will it stand by idly if universities fail to combat Jew hatred and the unlawful harassment and violence it animates. And it's just kind of weird because Muslim students, also get a lot of harassment. Immigrant students get a lot of harassment. It's odd that the Department of Education was like, this is where the buck stops.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's take another break here. And when we come back, more headlines of the week. So, John, what do you have for us this week?
I've got some reporting by Jeff Manning and Nigel Jaquist, who are no longer your colleagues, Sophie? Sort of your colleagues?
They are. It's just the Oregon Journalism Project. It's sort of our nonprofit journalism arm. We created a nonprofit newsroom, and they are separate entities, but it's still nested within Willamette Week and OJP Stories, and it's like a syndicate, right? They run in a bunch of different outlets, but they also run in Willamette Week. So I still call Nigel my colleague.
Yeah, there is this new nonprofit that they're working for, and I wanted to dig in on some of their reporting that came out this week about wildfire response in Oregon, something that's been on a lot of people's minds for obvious reasons over the last month or two. We did have a record-setting wildfire season in 2024. About 2,000 fires burned about 1.9 million acres, and it was really expensive. The Department of Forestry, which oversees this, kind of ran out of money, and the governor had to call a special session of the legislature to inject about $218 million to pay for the bills for all these firefighting efforts. At the same time, a group got together that was like, we need to figure out a way to fund this more effectively if we're going to keep having these record-breaking, really expensive wildfire seasons. So they got together the Wildfire Funding Work Group. It's about 35 lawmakers and industry reps. And this week, they sort of put out their first big idea for how they're going to come up with $140 million a year to fund firefighting efforts and wildfire mitigation here in Oregon. The idea, the kicker, the Oregon kicker rebate.
The one that it's supposed to go back to us?
The one that is supposed to go to us,
Okay.
Oregon's unique personal income tax rebate. They're suggesting that for one time, they delay the payment, invest it, and then use the interest to fund this wildfire prevention effort.
That sounds smart. They should do it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, yeah. Take a year's worth of kicker, invest it, and then we can pay for wildfire response.
Honestly, I feel like we don't invest enough. I mean, I get why we don't, because it's tricky. But I'm also just like, if we have money laying around, I hope it's invested somewhere. Oregon has this much money. I'm like, none of us should have to work a day in our life now.
Yeah.
If we invested this correctly. Do you know what I mean? I'm just like, this is all we've been paying. Instead of taxes, should we all just get an extra 401k? Because what's going on?
Claudia, are you applying for the state economist job? Is this your new?
No, that job should not go to me.
You're like, no, I should not do that.
That's so funny.
Well, who disagrees with you, Claudia, is the conservative website, the Oregon Catalyst, who put out the article, Senator Lays Out Kicker Theft Plan. So.
I just saw the whole little burglar outfit with the bandana over the eyes and the little slits. You know what I'm talking about?
This article also calls it the people's kicker, which I found a very interesting inversion of right-wing and left-wing politics. But
the people's kicker.
But in a laudatory way. It belongs to the people and these
oh my God.
muckety mucks want to steal it.
I do want to say that among the ideas that were considered before they landed on the kicker, and I have to say them because they were so bad, was a property tax fee for all landowners in the state, which everyone's like, oh, another property tax fee, an increase in hotel taxes, a tax on tires, a tax on real estate investment trusts that manage timber properties, and a surcharge on electric bills. The surcharge on electric bills was the one where I was like, you guys, are you smoking?
I saw that list.
What are you smoking?
I saw that list and I immediately thought of you, Claudia. I was like, oh, Claudia's going to be so pleased that they decided not to go with all these tax hikes.
The literally only two taxes where I'm just like, are you kidding? The rest I'm like, sure, whatever. But property and sorry. Electricity's already so expensive. And now PacifiCorp is like trying to make it even more expensive.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I will say there were a couple other ideas that were not like tax raises that were put out. Pulling a bit of money from the Oregon lottery was an idea. Taking a one-time transfer from the state's rainy day fund was an idea that was raised. But yeah, the kicker thing, they need to put it to the voters, obviously. We can't change the kicker without it being voted by the public, but it looks like that's the idea that they're going for. And the context for all of this, I should say, is that they did some really great reporting as well about PacifiCorp, which is a utility that covers a lot of rural Oregon that is in a huge amount of hot water based on the fires that happened in 2020. They're on the hook for potentially $6 million of payout for plaintiff in a lawsuit, also a $900 million civil lawsuit based on those fires where they were found that they'd been negligent in not shutting off the power.
From the U.S. Department of Justice, by the way.
Yeah.
So it's like they have two lawsuits, one from the state and one from the federal government. So like these two arms are just coming down on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted people to understand it wasn't just Oregon.
Yeah. But at the same time, they're sort of trying to maneuver as well. They've raised rates on residential customers and are also sort of trying to get the legislature to like help them out a bit with this huge amount of fines that they're facing based on these lawsuits.
I just think it's really incredible that this has been kind of going on for 4 years. And I think really under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't know about pretty much all of this because the wildfires are like so 4 years ago. But it's so
say that to the people who lost their home, dude.
No, I'm kidding. I said that sarcastically.
Okay.
So I think it was 1,500 plaintiffs joined a class action against PacifiCorp, and they did end up winning. But now PacifiCorp is like individually going after all these people to figure out what exact damages they have to pay.
Oh, wow. I didn't know they were going individually to each one. Oh, my God.
They are just getting very, very, very aggressive legally. Yeah. And it feels like this is such a potent example of like what big business can do when it comes to just like individual people. So I'm very curious to see how those individual cases sort of turn out.
Yeah, they're also trying to get the legislature to allow them to cap liability payments. So
yeah, plain and simple, they also want to shift costs to Oregonians. Legal experts are saying that this legislative session in particular is going to shape how or if state lawmakers actually hold them accountable. But even as I was reading through, even our state Republicans are like, fuck these guys. So I'm not sure how they're going to dodge paying. I can imagine the U.S. Department of Justice possibly dropping charges under this administration, but Oregon, no, yeah. I don't see it. Also, you guys, high voltage wires were very recently blamed for the Eaton fires that burned down Altadena in the LA area. They were also blamed for the Maui fires. It's been systemic. It's been happening so much that I'm confused as to why it keeps happening.
Well, I mean, the other option, I think, for a lot of these utilities is just to shut off power indefinitely anytime that there's like a real high fire risk, whenever it's dry and windy, which...
or bury the lines. But I guess that's a bigger investment. And to me, I'm just like, if you're a smart company, I would basically be going to the state and to the feds and being like, hey, you want to invest in some infrastructure changes? Let's work together. Should I get that job too, John?
I mean, definitely a better use of $1 billion than sending sorry money to everybody whose house got burned down. Yeah.
Sorry money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they should do that too. But
yeah, I thought this reporting was really fascinating. And I think we'll throw it in the show notes. Check it out. Oregon Journalism Project. Sort of Sophie's colleagues, but also kind of not.
Yeah.
I think of them as my colleagues.
Do you think of us as your colleagues, Sophie?
In a different way.
Aww.
Yeah. My pod colleagues.
In a different non-colleague way.
Yeah.
My pod leagues. I do want to say, guys, just to drive this home, is that when PacifiCorp was given like these charges by the state, they actually went to trial because none of these utility companies have ever been held accountable for fucking anything. Yeah. And I just love that they're like, sure, let's go to trial. And then they got burned. I mean that literally. And they were so confused. They're like, us?
Aww. Poor PacifiCorp lawyers.
Well, before we head out, just a bonus headline here. Did you know that Portland is getting a minor league soccer team called the Portland Bangers?
Yeah, the Portland Bangers.
Oh, the name.
Portland Bangers.
Yes.
That's fun.
But I also was just like, cool, more soccer. Like, what about baseball?
Yeah, get it together.
But yeah, Portland Bangers. I'm really excited. I wonder what the shirts are going to look like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's a lot of cliffs you could fall off of on that one.
I know, exactly. That's what I was saying. Oh, man. Well, Sophie, John, thank you so much for hanging out with me. And to everyone listening, please have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah. Thanks, Claudia.
Thanks.
That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening. Our podcast production team this week was John Notarianni, Julia Fiaioni, and Francisco Kilgore. Our Hey Portland newsletter editor is Rachel Monahan, and our host is me, Claudia Meza. Original music by Jenny Conley and Stephen Drizos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound and All the Kimonos. We'll be back Monday morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.